All right. Well, we're doing it, man. Kelly, thanks for being here, brother. I appreciate you taking some time.
Well, I fall into the category of dad. I'm not sure I fall in the category of world class. So, I got 50% of the title I'm in.
Well, I think there's a lot of people who would disagree with you on that latter half. Hopefully nobody disagrees with you on the former part, but
A few years ago, we got a call from an email from a woman, kind of got escalated up through our staff chain, just like, hey, and ultimately landed with Juliet. But this woman was pretty sure I was her father.
oh
And
wow.
it's one of those crazy moments where, my wife, God bless her, literally she was like, well, it's possible, and secondarily, she was like, well, this girl's already 18. So all we're going to have to do is pay for college. So like, she
Yeah.
was so practical about it. And I was like, Juliet, I was living in a truck in Durango. I was not in Florida. I have no idea how this happened. But anyway, what I'm here to say is this doesn't happen to women. It only
Yeah.
happens to men. So,
Yeah.
I think I know who my kids
surprise.
are.
Yeah, that surprise does not come too often for the ladies.
Our coaches call my kids Little Kelly's face. So that's what so we're trapped already. My kids are obviously my offspring because they've been trapped with my cheeks.
I love it. Those are some very pinchable cheeks. So why don't we actually just take it back from the beginning? I love to understand. I know you have two kids, right? Two daughters.
Oh yeah.
So what was going on in your life? What was the life of Kelly like at the time that your oldest showed up in the world when you first became a dad?
Georgia is 15. What's interesting is I was a first year grad student in physical therapy school.
Okay.
And so, like so many people who go to grad school, having a baby is a one way to make that experience more difficult and interesting.
Hmm.
I think what's interesting is, my wife, Juliet, had thyroid cancer when she was 20. So she doesn't have a thyroid. And she was convinced that she couldn't actually get pregnant because all the research around this thyroid dysfunction, led her to believe that it would be really difficult to conceive. And she went and saw her endocrinologist, and the endocrinologist was like, no, you don't have a disease. You just don't have a thyroid. There's a big difference. And she was like, you don't understand me, yeah. And then he's like, well, call me when you get pregnant. And then we tried to make a baby. We have a baby. Like it happened so fast, which is, sort of shocking when you realize how easy it is to potentially, and I know there are a lot of families out there who struggle really to do this, but potentially to conceive a child, human beings are really good at two things. We're good at reproducing and being hungry. Like we can out hungry a lot of animals, and we can reproduce like it's our job. So, that kid showed up, and what's notable about that is when I met my wife in 2000 in Chile at the World Championships for whitewater paddling, we were hanging out, and she was like, hey, by the way, we'll probably have a daughter. And if we have a daughter, we're going to name her Georgia. And I was like, great, because that's, is her grandmother's name. So already we knew that this being was had been willed into existence.
Yeah.
And then I was a young doc student. And then to make matters more interesting, later on that fall with a newborn baby, we opened our gym and grad school. So I had a baby, a gym, and grad school. And what you can see is, man, I really have gotten to the place where I appreciate the demands on new families, and I appreciate the demands on trying to hold it all together and being sleep deprived. And really, it helped me to be a lot more flexible in my approach with people and trying to change their lifestyle, because it's really difficult to hold all those things down.
Yeah. So let's go into that a little bit further, because what you're saying sounds very familiar to my life. I've got a full-time job, 8-month-old, almost 9-month-old daughter, and I'm starting this podcast. And so, as you know, that there's when you're starting a business and you have other commitments, making time for your family, you have to be very intentional about it. So kind of what was your mindset at that point, and how did you make sure that you prioritized family or kept them in the loop?
Well, first of all, is that I have a partner who is just a boss of a human being. And I think, I am a realist. I am a single child of a single working mother with an absent father, right? My dad was basically the great Santini. He, was captain of the, college quarterback team. He flew F4s in the Air Force. He was a fighter pilot, and he was just a raging alcoholic trying to manage his own, self-soothe his own dysfunctions. And he just imploded every family relationship, even that with his son. So I didn't really have a good model. But, you know, to the point that you're making is that, you know, it's easy when you're in your young 30s. This is when I had my first child, and I still hadn't accomplished anything yet in that I wanted to. I don't feel like I had consummated sort of the promise I'd made to myself about having a good career. You know, I didn't know who I was yet. There's a big difference between 30 and on Monday I'm turning 47. So here we are all these years later, and I'm, you know, slowly my ego's getting going. It's becoming less of a factor. You know, if I could just be support staff to my wife, that'd be fine. Right. I'm just like, oh, let me host teas for your greatness. You know, I call it Team Queen. And it's interesting. You know, I think the allegory, if you've ever watched The Crown, that show, Prince Philip who's the Queen's, you know, consort and husband, is just a terrible partner to the Queen in the beginning. Right. And I know he's got the baggage of the 1950s and 60s. And, you know, he just is like, man, I give up my career for you. And he's just so whiny. Yeah. And when we were watching that, I got uncomfortable because I was like, Juliet, I don't know if I would have been a young man any better, like, to your greatness, Queen. And I said, but now I'd be a great Team Queen. So our joke was, that guy needs to get on Team Queen. And what I'll tell you is that when I had this baby and, you know, I was young physio out of grad school, working the gym. Juliet is a full-time attorney. If you'd asked me what my goals were, I would have said things like, hey, I really want to improve human performance, and I want to be super successful, and I want to, you know, see if I can improve the ball in physical therapy, and yada, yada, yada. And then I would have been like, oh yeah, of course, great husband, good dad.
Right.
And, you know, when I turned 40, like when I was 39, I really got clarity about that. The only filter I have is, does this get my time? Does this action or this thing I'm doing get my family more time together, less time together? And that made it very clear for me that everything else, honestly, is bullshit. It is 100% bullshit. And you may have to do some delayed gratification training where you're like, okay, I have to go on this trip because this is how our family pays for rent and we can go on vacation. But as a young father, you know, what I can say is, you know, I didn't take family for granted at all, but I didn't think clearly, or didn't know to think clearly about that prioritization. And when I started to put it through that filter, it just got easier. You know, taking care of mama became easier. You know, saying no to incredible opportunities because it interrupted my family made it easier. And so I got better at this thing, certainly. And I was always very committed. And, you know, when my second child was born, Caroline, a few years later, Caroline is 12 now. You know, Caroline was born 6 weeks early. You know, we spent 3 weeks in the NICU. We had this PTSD experience from this kid who showed up a little bit early. She was, you know, again, 34 weeks is pretty young. She was over 5 pounds in 4 weeks. And she's going to be 5'10". Like, you can't believe how we call her the bear for a reason. But, you know, at the time, Juliet was on track to make a partner at her law firm. And I had gotten, you know, religion at that point, and was even able to basically teach a couple days a week, full-time, physio full-time. And then I was a full-time caregiver 2.5 days a week. And so I got this incredible, because I had set up my life, I got a ton of extra time with my second child as her primary caregiver the whole day, you know, and then try to come home and have have my partner set up so that she could spend time with her kids and not have to do the other stuff. And, you know, what you have to do then is just rinse, wash, repeat, you know, and it is tough. You know, Gray Cook is this incredible thinker. He invented this thing called the FMS, the functional movement screen. Maybe if people have heard of that. He's like a brother to me. And one of the things that is remarkable about Gray is, you know, people come up to him and say, hey, you know, I'm thinking about writing a book. You know, what do you think? And he's like, well, if you haven't written it or taken a crack at it, you're not going to write it. He's like, let me tell you why. Because I had a newborn baby. I was a single dad. And I was writing my book on the washing machine while my kid slept at night. You know what I mean? So what I'm saying is, once you prioritize that, you'll begin to realize how much extra bullshit there is in your life that you really don't need. And it becomes, you know, everything gets stripped away. And for a minute, you will lose yourself as what it meant to be a man. And that's okay. In terms of, you know, how do I define myself based on the things I used to do, or my role in society as like an athlete, like those things. Now is not the time for that. Right? You should not be world-class fit right now, unless that is your job to be world-class fit. You need a kettlebell in your kitchen. You need to stop drinking wine and strip out some carbohydrate and protect as much sleep as you can protect. And then there'll be a time again where you get to turn those switches back on. But in the beginning, man, when you have a kid, it's tough. And that's the game.
No, that's interesting. So I want to dive into a few things you said there a little bit more. So first of all, that prioritization, when you made that switch in your mind of like, okay, if it doesn't serve my family, it doesn't matter. It's out. Like that's your filter. Was there something that instigated that decision in your mind?
Deep burnout, like massive burnout. Juliet is also a product of divorce. And, one of our main goals is not to be divorced. We don't want our kids to show up at a blended family Christmas. Like that is like, for us, means that like, wow, that we didn't achieve what we're trying to achieve, because we've had too much of that ourselves. And, the problem is when you start to roll into your late 30s, early 40s, the pan is starting to get hot, and you're starting to become, you're starting to be able to feed yourself. You may be in the beginnings of a career. These things are starting to happen, right? And at the same time where you're finally starting to do the things you need to do to have security for your family, security for yourself, security for your kids, is when you're like, when do I sleep? When do I train? Do I have any friends? I don't have any friends,
Right.
When we wrote Supple Leopard 7 years ago, or 8.5 years ago, that summer, like I didn't do anything fun. I just wrote the book, stayed with my family, wrote the book. And don't get me wrong, my wife is the greatest adventure partner I could possibly have. She's one of the reasons we think partners, men and women, men, girls, whatever, should, and everyone in between, should train together. It's one of the ways that we feel like as a couple with a baby, at least doing Peloton, having 2 Pelotons where you could face each other. Like you have this 1 hour where you're both trying to exercise a little bit to stay intact. And a beautiful way to do that is to train together. And CrossFit was an easy way to do that. Swing kettlebell is an easy way to do that. I think one of the additional stressors that you can put on your family is that, like, I ride, my wife does something else, or my wife's a runner and I, like to lift weights. I think at some point it's crucial to do those things. But as an aside, we were at a place where for the first time in our lives, we weren't critically poor and super stressed about paying, rent back. We live in the most expensive city in the world, in San Francisco. We both had freakish student loan debts from law school and physical therapy school, and we didn't have family help, and I think what was happening was we were suddenly valuing, hey, we see that there's traction where we're going in this business. And the thing that was going out was my health. I was just, I was not sleeping very much. I would teach on the weekends, get home late, go to my gym and sleep on my treatment table because I'd get home at 1 a.m. and then I'd coach at 5:30 a.m. And, I don't know how many 4 hours of sleep you can do. Meanwhile, my wife is at home managing, holding 1 baby, 2 babies, being a lawyer. I mean, like we lost on both sides of that equation. Like the harder I worked to create this thing, the more my wife was left at home to deal with all these pieces. And we just were like, hey, this isn't sustainable. And I think what's crucial is that in any of these endeavors, there are moments where you have to work at unsustainable paces. And Steve Fontaine, the great runner, says best. He's like, the suicide pace is the only pace. And the key is to go ahead and adopt that suicide pace, because it's a suicide pace, but recognize that is not sustainable. And part of the suicide pace is full-blown failure of your health, of your relationships, of your, So you're going to have to commit to this and then decide that you can't maintain the suicide pace before you actually die. So it's simultaneously like, hey, we're going to have to grind, but also we're going to need to know when not to grind so that we can actually do this again. And I think, every time I would hear these ideas of, balance, I was like, are you kidding me? Like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't have time to gratitude journal in the morning. I have to change diapers and get the kids to school and get my kid fed and right. And instead, what I think is it's a pendulum. and you're either nailing it or not nailing it, and the pendulum's going one direction or the other. And for a moment, you're right in the middle, and you're this balance. But you pass through balance at like 500 miles an hour. You know,
you get a slight glimpse out of the car window.
Yeah, and then it's particularly tricky when we were the first of our friends to have kids, and so no one understood what it was about. And you don't know until you know. I mean, I remember we had some friends who had kids, and they were kind of peripheral friends, and they were like, "We can't come, our kid's napping." And Julie, they were like, "Would never let a nap ruin our social life."
Yeah.
And then we were like, "Sorry, we protect like naps are life, and if my kid misses a lap, we'll pay for that price." So
right,
that's the truth. It's you simultaneously have to work at something that's impossible and sustainable and will kill you, and you have to recognize that, boy, I need to make sure that I have a program in there that allows me to stay intact. And let me give you an example. I would get home at 10 o'clock coaching. Juliet is an attorney, so she's worked. We're starting our first business, or our second business, Mobility WOD, and we made a video a day for, we've been making videos and contents for 10 years. But I would get home in this original mobility project 10 years ago, and it'd be late at night, and Juliet would be like, "We got to film." I'd be like, "Well, I got to work out first." And so I would do the 10, 10, 10, 10 at 10, which was like 10 burpees, 10 pull-ups, 10 kettlebell swings for 10 minutes at 10 p.m. And then I literally had to be like, "Well, that's what I got. That's good enough, right?"
Yeah, that counts.
Nailed it. Like I'm not going to go to the Olympics, but the 10, 10, 10, 10 at 10 at 10, I think is really the key. And that's why you just got to constrain your environment so that you can have these little windows that look like, hey, I'm going to step out while my kid's in a nap, and I'm going to swing kettlebells and do burpees, or get on my spin bike and do intervals back and forth quickly. And then that's got to be good enough. And then you have to be like, all right, now's not the time to become an elite athlete.
Yeah. Yeah. My wife and I are doing just like 30-day challenges where this month it's 30 days of core, where it's just, you're doing something. You have to commit to at least that. That's the floor. But then on a day when, shit might literally hit the fan, you could say, all right, well, I got my 5 minutes of that in. I got that in. I met my quota. And then tomorrow, maybe I'll get in the basement and get into like the dungeon of pain for a little bit. But
and cleverly, you both decided to do it together.
Mm-hmm.
And I think see that point number one is that it is easy to be in the middle of battle with all of the demands of being a young parent right now, and lose track of the fact, like, who's your number one partner? Who's the lion's share? Because there's just a lot to be done, and it's not very sexy.
Right.
But I'll tell you, hold in there, because your kids get better and better and better and better, and it gets more and more fun. And, you just got to get through this together.
Yeah, no, that's super exciting. And I'm glad that you talked through your approach to kind of quote unquote balance or lack thereof, because it's almost why I started this podcast, just to understand how people who, how fathers and men who achieve at a high level and have done great things, but haven't sacrificed their family in the process, view that world of balance or the, integration or lack thereof, because I think it's something that is very hard to look at in the moment when you're in it, and even see a light at the end of the tunnel at times, because you feel like you're behind on in every space. You're like, oh, I didn't get to this, or this. I dropped the ball on being a dad here. I was a shitty husband here. Like, what am I doing? So it's frustrating to hear your version of it on the other side.
One of our good friends is a surfer named Laird Hamilton.
Mm-hmm. And he'll be on the show in a couple of weeks.
Fantastic. So Laird has this idea, and he'll probably share it. So I'll steal his thunder right now.
Yes.
But he has this concept of, you're not confirmed. And he talks about it as a man, because he's a man. He can relate to it. But you're not confirmed as a father, as a parent, particularly, until you can be awesome at life and have a child. And it's not that you have to have a child to be a complete person. He's not saying that at all. What he's saying is it's really easy to be young and great and have bucket loads of time and kill it.
Yeah.
And what he's also saying is it's really hard to be a great parent and still be able to do something in the world, or have interesting work, or work at that same intensity or that same level. And that's when he's like, oh, you're confirmed. So like as soon as you can do those things simultaneously, then he's like, all right, I think maybe there's something there for you, right? Otherwise,
it's like the weight vest of life.
It is. And sometimes, in our work, I capture a lot of athletes who, after injury, who've had catastrophic injury and are trying to rebuild to get back to the Olympics, get back to world championships, that sort of thing. I have to tell you, those athletes are sometimes a lot more interesting to work with. And I'm a lot more interested in working with them because it's not just easy. They're not just 19 and a phenom. Like you're the greatest X in the world when you're 20. Really, you're too famous, you have too much money, I mean, like those are your problems. It's really interesting when you're a little bit older and you have a family or you're battling an old injury. It just makes for, what they say, smooth seas don't make great sailors. So we're interested in great sailors. Some of that is you just have to do the time, and having a kid is the best way to stress test. Oh, you think your little optimization plan is sustainable? Let's just go ahead and stress test that a little bit.
Right. Yeah. Your perfect morning routine. Let's see how that looks once you have a crying baby.
That's great. That's great.
Any unknown what time that's going to be.
A few years ago, I was paddling the Molokai, which is the race from, you basically paddle across the channel between Molokai, the island of Molokai, and Oahu. And it's like we kind of call it the World Championships because it's just a bad race. The waves come at you from the side. The channel's ugly. It's a long race. It's 50 kilometers. But by the time you're back and forth and around, it's a little bit longer. And, what's interesting about that is that I was using training for it, had this goal. I was just going to try to get this thing done. And I was using a heart rate variability kind of device that I would need to put a pad on my hand and one on my head and wear this heart belt, and it would track my heart rate variability, sort of my rest and recovery scores. And I'd have to be up a little bit, and then I would have to go lay down in our guest room and try to, for like 10 minutes, and breathe deeply while I got my scores. And my wife would be like, "What are you doing? Like, what, we can't, where are you? What's going on? Like, I need help." And I'd be like, "I'm trying to see how ready I am." And that was immediately one of those technologies, like, okay, this is for, people who live like monks. Like,
right.
I had to stop doing that because there's no way it fit into my life. And really, that's a simple way of, when people have so many ideas about, optimization or working with young people. And, I think for us, we discard a lot of technology because it doesn't scale and it doesn't hold true across a lot of cohorts. You know what I mean? So, for us, I was like, well, that's probably a valuable technology for some people, but less valuable for me as a young father.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I hear that. I had 4 years of studying personal development and having a podcast, and I tried to, test all these different ideas and live like your buddy, Tim Ferriss. And then, you throw a baby into the mix. And one of the things that I am learning about myself is that when I have an idea of how something, I like to have an idea of how I'm going to do something, have a plan and then stick to the plan. Okay, I've got 30 minutes to do this thing. I'm going to do that, and then we'll be done with it. But then all of a sudden, just a perfect example is I'm just going to paint the front door today. We moved into a new house at the beginning of the year. I'm going to paint the front door. It's going to take me like 2 hours. No, that's like a 3-week project, because every time you start, you get some chaos erupts in the house. You got to run back inside. You come back out, your paintbrush is hard as a rock. And I'm just like, all right, well, we got to roll with the punches. And this does not agree with my personality, but this is the challenge, and I'm learning from it.
Yeah, I think that's really the key, is that you have to have these really set of different expectations. So what's interesting, of course, is that those touchstones of why am I doing this suddenly is a lot clearer, and you can destroy once you kind of can begin to be far enough away that you can remove your sense of ego and sense of self and the peace. And then what you realize is that you're really on a great team. And the secret weapon for me was that the more my wife felt supported by me, the better my life was. The more I prioritized Juliet getting her sleep and getting her training and getting her needs met, then my needs were immensely met more, and, so, here we are anyway. I'm not kvetching. I mean, it's amazing. But one of the things about this thing is, you get to really stress test. And, we had like a Peggy Orenstein, who wrote a couple books, Girls and Sex, Boys and Sex, just did a talk for our school. And, one of the things she's talking about with young people is how just alcohol is much more likely to encourage hookup culture, and it's more likely to lower inhibitions and have negative sexual interactions and, of any kind. And, one of the things that Juliet and I raised our hands about just anonymously, we're like, well, adult binge drinking here in Marin is the highest in the country. And what we have is, people trying to self-medicate, they're self-soothing. And so we're not saying drinking is bad. If you want to go fast and lift heavy weights to be a world champion, you really have to look at, alcohol as another stressor, which is a way to look at it. Hey, am I willing to take this stressor on in terms of my, because there's sometimes you're like, daddy needs a bourbon, mama needs a bourbon, 4:00, But what we realized, of course, is that as we got older, we couldn't buffer those things, and it wrecked our sleep and made us less effective. So that self-soothing mechanism, which is what that is, how do I make myself feel better, wasn't working for us. But what we see is in our neighborhood, people are drinking a bottle of wine a night, and we had a VP, she is a VP of a big firm, and she was drinking 2 bottles of wine a night, just take the edge off, and that was just a coping mechanism. So one of the things I think is interesting, again, is to sort of stress test. I mean, the new movie Dune's coming back out. Dune is my personal companion of thinking about the world. But early on, the young Paul Atreides puts his hand into the box. She makes him think his hand is melting off, and if he pulls his hand out of the box, he dies. So he's got to override his emotions and feelings with his rational brain. And that's a sign of his humanity, that he's not just driven by his brainstem and reaction.
Yeah.
And what an interesting allegory for being a parent, right? You can't be driven by these emotions. You have to be driven by this rational brain, and you have to decide to keep your hand in the box. I got 4 hours of sleep, killed it. I'm gonna do the best I can today. But what she really says there is, our test is crisis and observation. And if you want to see crisis, just drop into a new family. And I don't mean crisis as in this is bad, but man, we just stress tested. And what you see is that it will bring out your default tendencies. So again, it's easy to kill it when there's no real existential threat or sleep pressure, or, worried about your kids eating or your kids' health and your partner's health. But you want to really see how stable your coping mechanisms are, or you want to elicit what your tendencies are. Go ahead and just be sleep deprived for 3 months. Let me know how that goes for you.
Yeah. Amen. And kind of along those lines of kind of Laird's view on, that litmus test of a man. I was reading an article in Thrive Global that you were featured in an interview, and you were talking about just manhood in general, and how there's not really a righthood or a ritual for becoming a man in today's society. And that there is somewhat that for women, whether you look at it as pregnancy or getting your period or whatever it might be, that can be kind of considered okay, now you're a woman, you're stepping into motherhood through the process of pregnancy. I'd love to get your thoughts on that, if that's still kind of the way you think. And if so, how dads can almost ritualize or swim instead of sink when they're thrown into that fatherhood role without that ritual.
Well, I think you'll be interested to see, of course, who is your father and your grandfather, and how did they father, right? And so what are the models around you,
right?
Some of that I think is also that it's useful to have a little cabal where you can be very vulnerable. I think one of the issues is that it's difficult for men potentially to be vulnerable for other men, being, dude, I'm failing, or I'm falling apart, or, I'm not having sex with my wife, or, I'm really worried about X, and so, I was terrible asking for help, of course, because I got this. I fucking got this. This is, the same things that allowed me to be a maniac were the same things that were imploding, and so, one of the things I think is useful is that, you have to have, it's like a men's council, a cabal, where you can just, be completely vulnerable. And you have to be transparent and be able to, be able to just lay it out that you're struggling. And some of that is just voicing that, holy crap, I'm just super worried about what's going on. One of the things that, that does then is it sort of ritualizes the meta awareness. So you stop going from sort of reactivity to reactivity. There's some point where you need to be able to observe and participate in your own behavior and realize you're controlling your behavior. Otherwise, you're just pulling your hand out of the box every single time. And there's 1,000 boxes, that you're going to burn your hand in, because that's the reality of being a young person and a new parent. My wife and I go on we have a date on standing on Wednesdays where we go, get a dinner and we talk about our feelings. We call it our feelings meeting. So one of the things is, I remember there was a moment where I was like, I have these friends from college and my national team friends, but I didn't feel like I had a couple guys around me that I had nurtured and developed and put interest in, commitment to, because it's difficult, but where I felt like, okay, I can really ask for some help if I'm struggling.
Yeah.
And I realized I needed to really develop those things and continue to nurture and feed those relationships, because all of a sudden there was just no time. And so you have to just make time to make sure that you're not the only dad in the world, which is so easy to do, whether that's calling your own parent or, again, even just one or two other men or partners or whatever however you describe your gender, two other people in your community with whom you can be super vulnerable and have this sort of meta awareness conversation with your partner. And, like I said, Juliet and I go out and we sit down, and the only rule is no defensiveness. And it's all on there. How you spoke to your kid when, she messed up, or did you get angry, or, how did you deal with that snippiness? Like, you've just got to be conscious enough, or have a mechanism by which you can be conscious of the thing, so that you just didn't go through fatherhood. You were aware of going through fatherhood.
Yeah. So how did you approach creating those or building those relationships then? Because I think you bring up a really valuable point, that a lot of the guys face that they don't have those vulnerable relationships once you get out of, college or a team or an area where those relationships are kind of built into the mechanism. Now you're kind of on your own with your family.
Yeah. It's interesting. Juliet has some ladies here who are amazing, and, the guys aren't necessarily vulnerable. And so, there's a group of men in my neighborhood, fathers, and there's a bunch of families in our neighborhood. We're all friends, and it's a pretty amazing group of people. But one of the dads was having an affair, and, he never mentioned it to us. And, and I can see why, because he knew he was going to get the beat down, And that, I thought, was a failure of the fact that, like, we hadn't gone to the place where he's like, hey, I'm having feelings for this woman and I need help before I implode my life. Right.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, we definitely have to get, have a few guys where you can be like, hey, look, I need a place where I can be really vulnerable and exposed. And so that's kind of baked in, not just we drank wine together or smoked a cigar. That's superficial high school bullshit. Like you really need a few people. And I think in the past, there may have been a tribal chief, there may have been a pastor, there may have been, I don't necessarily think the Catholic Church is necessarily the paradigm of these things, but, imagine going to confession once a week. There's a moment where you have to face up to who you were that week. Right. Or there's a mechanism by which you can be reflective. And I think that's super powerful. Yeah. And, I think some of those secular experiences get lost sometimes unless you're intentional around them. Right. Yeah. And again, it doesn't, even if it's once a month, because that's what you can fit it in, or it's, you go for a 20-minute walk, every other week. I just think there's a place in there where you're like, hey, we have to create some kind of cabal so that you can understand and I can understand, and I can reach out and say, well, dude, how you doing? I know you're getting your ass kicked on this. And I don't think it's just enough to get in together and barbecue in the backyard. You almost have to be a little bit more formal about it.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, because I agree. You have to be formal. You have to almost have the commitment too of the other guys who are involved with that.
Or women, or, I just think you gotta have a squad.
Yeah.
Where you can someone can understand what you're going through a little bit. Because otherwise, it feels like you're on an island. And here's the deal. If you want to implode and be a shitty dad, just pretend like you can do it all by yourself. Like you got this.
Yeah.
You're going to fall on your face, like, you know? And your partner is not going to get the best version of you. And some of that is just the reaction of, you know, we live in this really, really tricky time right now. And, you know, and if you've got kids at home and you're trying to work and your partner's trying to work. And I mean, you know, one of our good coach friends says we win or we learn. And I don't think it's possible to win fatherhood. You don't win.
Mm-hmm.
And when like, nailed it. I put my perfect picture of me fishing or hunting with my son on Instagram, and I'm done. That's, you know, I just ghost ride this thing.
Father World Championships.
Yeah, and you know, one of the things that I think is really interesting is that we see up here in our neighborhood, speaking with another coach who is a father, we see, because we interact with a lot of families. So like I see a lot of families and interact with a lot of families, maybe more than other people do. I mean, obviously you're in school and you'll see as this, you know, but as a gym owner, you just interact with a lot of, you know, more people sometimes than you would, you know, other families intensely. But we see that a lot of families are just, you know, the kids get into high school and they're just like, oh, they're burned out. It's like they were going to run a marathon, but they pulled a hammy at the 5K mark and they just kind of limped on. And then, you know, you just don't get to let up on the gas. And I think that's really the key. You'll have a different set of problems, and sometimes it'll be super smooth and super easy. And you're like, I'm killing it. And then you're going to realize that you know, your kids want to vape or are addicted to tech, or your boys are addicted to porn, or the phone's in the room, or there's something that's going to come up that you're going to have to deal with, you know?
Yeah. Yep.
What's your plan?
So
we don't have a plan. We don't have a plan.
Right. There's no rule book, and you got to be ready for that moment. Well, so you mentioned your role as a business owner, as a gym owner, and as a coach. And for those who don't know, you've coached some really world-class athletes, some of the most intense military personnel that are out there, you know, just an incredible group of people. Do any of your coaching skills translate into parenting skills, or are those two completely separate worlds?
Well, you know, I think what's interesting is that, you know, if you're a really good coach, you recognize that your athletes show up as a different set of people every day. Mm-hmm. They have different stressors, how they react to the volume, their bodies are different. And so a little bit of, you know, you have to have a plan to understand where you are for the day. So, you know, some of our dynamic warm up, right, is assessing where we are today. What's going on? You know, is this a day when it's, you know, the frying pan's hot? Are we going to cook today? Or do we just need to, like, you know, go through the motions and pay attention? So, you know, one of the things about being a good coach is that you never arrive. You never just like nailed it, done, process. You know, if you're a scientist, and that's really what a coach is, you make hypotheses every day and you test it. Mm-hmm. And you have to be open to willing that you're wrong. You know, open to being wrong is part of the process. In fact, you're looking at really this conscious goal of, you know, am I getting what I want with my hypotheses with my athletes, right? That's really the, you know, and then if you apply that sort of open model thinking to how you're doing as a parent, then it really ends up like all you can do is a better job tomorrow. And you can be more effective at the way you communicate, and you can change up tacks, and you can own, hey, I was totally wrong on that. We really messed that up. You know, and I think Juliet and I have done an amazing job, or a fair job, of being open to the fact that, look, we think we have a plan, and then that plan goes to hell in a handbasket, and we're okay with changing the plan or modifying the plan.
Yeah.
You know, and I think if you come in with that idea that you're a different person, your kids, your family's a different thing, and you can't win, you know, there's a great book called Finite and Infinite Games. And it's about the sort of nuances of applying game theory to applying sort of to complex problems and solutions, or finding solutions to those complex problems. But a finite game has clear winners and losers. You know what the rules are. It starts and stops, and the goal is to win. And an infinite game has none of those features. The infinite game can only be played well, and to win, all you can do is play well. And also, here's the key piece: keep everyone else in play. Mm-hmm. So your job as a player is to keep everyone else in play. That's also part of the game, not just to win. And so when you apply thinking around like this sort of binary 1-0 win, didn't win towards business, you're going to lose. You never win business. You just solve the next set of problems and you try to play really well and have a more robust organization. But you don't ever win business. I mean, maybe when you sell your business, you won business, but the rest of it, you don't win. You don't win being a dad. That's a game that you're stuck in now. And what I think is that we have this mindset where we've gamified those things, and they're not games to be won and played. So if you come in and you are willing to say, boy, I bet I can talk to my kids differently or react differently. I mean, you want to see just all your tendencies, and what how programmed you were by your parents. Go ahead and just, have a kid and lose your temper. And I can tell you exactly who your dad was and what your training was. And, and I think you've got to be really hyper aware that you can do better. And that takes immense humility and immense vulnerability. And in that, you end up with a far better product. And more importantly, it feels like a game that's sustainable. You're like, okay, we got this. This is much better, So again, let me remind you, you've got to keep everyone on play. That's part of winning.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier, kind of as you grew and matured and you got more control over your ego was less in play. I imagine that's a piece of it too, being able to check your ego and admit that you may not have been taking the right approach. You have to reevaluate how you're approaching this thing of fatherhood.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean that you don't charge in and you can't be fierce and terrible and awesome. It means that you're just aware of the process.
Right.
So again, you have to be committed, and there's enough dealing with your partner and around children and work that sometimes you're like, how are we doing? Like that check-in every week gives us a hard break where we sort of have to come together and be like, all right, well, what's going on? Same thing. I think if you can really touch base with have one or two people in your little cabal tribe of council of elders where you can be like, dude, you gotta almost name the devil around this. And if you think, oh, I'll just go for a walk and it'll happen, it won't happen. I think you got to get in the weeds and be conscious of it. So, I think what's interesting though is, I think if Juliet and I didn't have kids, we'd work 24/7, and so the kid, I see a lot, we always look at Hollywood. And for example, we work in Hollywood sometimes, and the people who are the most normal have children because they can't, you can't be famous for your kids. You're just nothing. You're just a dad.
You're just the dork. Yeah.
You're just the jerk who yelled at me to make my bed. So, I think what's nice is that kids are a self-regulation device. Obviously you can not have kids and be a terrific person, of course. But I think it really does ground you into the moment because, man, it's just nonstop, it's non-freaking stop.
So if you could, we talked about a lot of really impactful things that I think can help myself and some of the dads who are listening, really fine tune and sharpen their fatherhood sword. But if you could go back in time and talk to yourself, when you were 31, you just had your first kid, is there one piece of wisdom or advice that you might impart upon yourself at that stage, kind of experiencing what you've experienced now and knowing what you do as a dad?
It's first of all, is this that you're going to have to work at some unsustainable intensities, and you're going to have to then also simultaneously back off. Otherwise you'll implode.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I think is crucial. A project we're working on right now is, we think that in the 40s and 50s are your most important decades in terms of the durability of your health. Mm-hmm. And when you're in your 30s, potentially where a lot of people become parents, you still can take the liberties of being a younger person where you can get by on less sleep. They say having children is really the best for young people and rich people. And because they're young, you've got these reserves, and rich because you can get all the help you need.
It's like a boat.
Well, what I'll say is that as a gym owner, I've witnessed enough guys in their mid 30s, early 40s who've sort of fallen apart. Right. And part of playing this long game is you can't get fat. You can't just drink all the time. Like you're going to put yourself into a hole where you're not going to be able to thrive when it starts to matter most. You're going to have spent a lot of needless credits. So like when you're a parent, now is the chance to really try to control something, right? Which means maybe I'm going to control my drinking or my THC use, or I'm going to control my food, right? So you can think, well, I can't go out and be a maniac in all these other sports and things that I used to do and how I define myself. So there's got to be some agency and some control. And that may mean you do yoga for 15 minutes in front of the YouTube. That's fine. Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter. But you've got to think about this as a physical race as much as it is sort of a psycho-emotional thing. And I think what I have seen is it's easy to take that body for credit, and then all of a sudden you've cooked yourself, and it's difficult to dig yourself out of that hole. And, you know, we're seeing a lot of, you know, the guys in our neighborhood are heavy and they're pre-diabetic, and, you know, we understand. Julie and I own a gym like that. We obviously cope with, you know, like we're in fitness, and that's one of our coping mechanisms. Instead of drinking, we exercise. I mean, that really is the thing that allows us to feel like less maniacs. But, you know, as you track with parents who get older and older, and you'll see that, man, parents, sometimes you look around and we look grizzled in these school meetings because we are grizzled. And, you know, and because you sort of, it's easy to burn through and sacrifice all the things that, like, you do not need to eat chicken McNuggets. Your kids don't need to eat chicken McNuggets. You know, you need to be a little bit more ninja on a few things so that you can bridge to that moment where you start to open up again and can go to a class or start to lift weights. Or, you know, I just think one of the things is, you know, start taking your health a little bit more seriously when your children are young, because all of a sudden it's really hard to reverse course in your 40s. When you have the time, you're like, wow, I'm 15 pounds too heavy. I'm weak. I haven't, you know, I'm stiff. You've been coasting on the fumes of your adolescence.
Yeah, no, I think that that's important wisdom to impart on all of us. And I know we're wrapping up on time here, Kelly. So if people want to learn more about you and they're interested in checking out everything that you're putting out into the world, which is a lot, and you put out a lot of amazing content, especially for, you know, young parents, older parents, non-parents, anybody who's trying to keep their body in order, where would you point people?
Well, we are at the ready state. So this is a good example. One of the things that we try to do is teach people how to do some self-care, basic maintenance on their bodies. It could be athletic recovery, or how do I chill out at night when I'm dead, right? Mm-hmm. And, you know, one of the things that I think we go a long way is if you have a roller or a ball, you can do some soft tissue work for 10 minutes before you go to bed, and you will sleep better and you will feel less anxious. And you had a little input into your body. So you kept your tissues lithe and supple and pliable, and you were able to kind of deal with your junky stuff. And it's part of a physical practice. So you may not have been able to smash your bike, you know, 3-hour bike ride, but if you did a little breathing, you did a little soft tissue work, you know, you ate more protein and less carbohydrate and sugar during the day, and you didn't drink during the week, suddenly you have something that makes you pretty sustainable. So thereadystate.com, we have a 2-week on-ramp program. It's free. We'll teach you how to mobilize. But, you know, if you just started doing a little soft tissue work before you went to bed, I think you'll find that you have a more powerful coping mechanism for the impending stress. Because guess what? Tomorrow your kid's going to have a cold. And, you know, tomorrow you're going to have to teach your kid online. Tomorrow, you know, your kid's going to destroy some hearts. Or tomorrow, like, there's something coming that you don't realize is coming. You think you've nailed it, but you haven't seen the next, you know, scene in the movie yet.
Right. Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. And we'll make sure that's all linked up as my dog loses his mind here. Thank you very much, Kelly. I really appreciate you joining us, sharing your insights, kind of what you've experienced. I think that we've got a lot to take away from this one. So I really appreciate you, my man.
Absolutely pleasure. Thank you so much.